Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on visual project management. Look forward to presenting you with a number of tools and techniques that hopefully you find beneficial as you go through your innovation pipeline, selecting programs for execution, and really coordinating your team to rally around those objectives. We will go through the presentation, and we'll open up for some questions at the end. There's a chat there as well if you'd like to use that. So just for your background, my name is John Adams. I am the Vice President, Senior Vice President of the Growth Practice with Lean Focus. And so I'll give you a little bit of overview of our business and how I fit in there. A lot of my background is starting in engineering, working through new product development, moving into product management, and then general management in a number of industries from semiconductor test through industrial, and then technical coatings, medical, semiconductor and electronics, nuclear markets, a wide range of different applications. And what we're going to talk about here today is a tool that I've been able to apply successfully in a number of those different businesses throughout my career, as have many of the clients that I've worked with over the past year and a half as part of Lean Focus. And so hopefully there's some good nuggets in here for you, and certainly be available to help you further understand in your particular situations where and how some of these may be effective. In Lean Focus, we focus on a few key areas. We focus really on stabilizing your foundation, right? So ensuring that you have a strong foundation to drive growth. Okay, so we have a lean practice, a leadership practice, and a growth practice. And through our foundational elements and lean, we help ensure that you have the cash flow, the profitability to really support and drive growth, and then provide a lot of the tools that will help you realize those objectives that we're all going after these days. Our system breaks down this way, as I was just talking about, and we're here today in the Visual Project Management Obeya Room. So this is around the design element. There's a lot of work on the front end around figuring out what segments we want to play in, what game we're playing, how are we going to win in those different markets against the competitive marketplace that we're part of. We go through a discover phase around voice of the customer, understanding the market needs, converting those into technical needs, and then getting into the design of the products. And that's where we sit today, and we will focus for the sake of this conversation. So the first question, why do projects fail, right? And fail is a strong word, but in that context, why do projects miss on some of the objectives that we originally set out, okay? And we often think about the three-legged stool, right? You can have it on time, you can have it meeting all your requirements, or you can have it at your cost targets, right? And pick two is typically the shorthand joke that we have around there. And so what are some of the elements that really become the obstacles that can derail a program and put us in that situation where we're having to really do some background work and try to get that back on track. Okay. So in a lot of cases, there's a few key elements that might resonate with you. Often that we see projects on a spreadsheet or software, and what we mean by that, of course, you're going to use some of the advanced tools and techniques today that are software based and are fantastic systems to do that. The challenge comes in when that's the only place that information is available, because in that case, it's often available to a subset of the team, often at the leadership or at least the project management level. And many of the folks actually doing the work don't necessarily have insight into the interrelationships of the other functions, or where and how the work they're doing fits in, or what the implications are of delays in certain parts of the projects. So we'll talk about the importance of visibility on that. If we go up a level and say, look at all the different projects we're trying to, aspiring to do in parallel, right? We might have an awful lot of projects in that funnel, but we can get stuck, right? We don't have a lot coming out the back end. And often that gets into, do people have too many different programs on the plate? Are we not getting all of the work done around requirements, definition, and translating that into actual development criteria because of that front end over allocation of resources? Or we're not getting it done, we're starting design, and then we're having to come back and redo some of that work as we get initial feedback from our development partners. So really having too much on our plates and not really having the discipline around ensuring that we're following the right sequence on each of those can be a problem with incomplete information. And then often, we hear this a lot. I've had it in my own businesses. It's always something we all have to work through, but the details are cumbersome, or the files aren't maintained, or they're in different areas. Different people have different pieces of information. It's often a project will start out with a very well-defined and clear project plan, but the amount of maintenance to keep that up to date with all of the different moving parts can become very cumbersome, okay? And so really being thoughtful about at what level, weekly, are we going to measure progress, and how are we actually driving the activities on a daily basis, again, in a way that's transparent and requires less overhead are some of the key elements we'll get into here today. So some of the common challenges we often come across, our clients come across. I've experienced these again in my own roles and positions. Moving goalposts, right? So requirements evolving, or at least the perception that they're evolving, right? So did we really get a good understanding and alignment on the front end of what we were going to do, or as we go through it, are we learning more or evolving our thinking, right? So really having that discipline on the front end to get that scope defined, to get that validated, and then to ensure that there's an awful lot of discipline in the process, I'll say, to make sure that if there's a change to that, it's very well vetted, and it can't happen ad hoc. It has to be approved through the context of the overall project upkeep, and it doesn't become a distraction for the team unless we all get consensus on where we're going. Unclear or conflicting objectives, okay? So if we don't have a holistic view of the program, there might be, it could be around either, something as basic as a cost versus performance, right? We want all of this capability, but our cost targets are forcing us to make some trade-offs on that, and we don't have alignment around those sets of principles. So really getting that on the front end can be key to making sure we don't get paralyzed, or we don't end up spinning as we go through the program. Unclear KPIs to measure success by the team. So again, this thought around the scope, around the timing, and around the cost, having real clarity and tracking around those three, and ensuring that we're able to consistently monitor where we're at can really help break through some of those areas. If we don't have a clear business case or priority confusion, and often this comes out, the questions to ask here are, how does this program or these sets of programs align to our growth strategy, right? Are they consistent with that, or are they orthogonal to that? And how do we need to be thinking about it? In that same context, how do these programs align to our top customers or our key target customers, right? Are they mapped there, and do we really have a pull either from the market or existing or new customers? And what you're really testing there is it well aligned to our growth strategy? Do we have any risk that the programs we're selecting to do are doing it based on internal views of what we should do versus a market-driven view with customer alignment, right? And many times we're going to come up with great ideas that our customers aren't necessarily asking for. So we need to have room for that in our innovation engine. It's not only about doing exactly what your customers ask for, but it is about really developing those ideas to the point that you can communicate them and the value of those ideas well to the customer, and get alignment on the priorities for that program before you actually staff and begin development, okay? So oftentimes we get really excited on a great idea and we want to get running. It's really about how do we set that in the context of our business case and really do that with a degree of discipline that in fact we're going to be able to realize the value out of that. Some risks here if we don't have enough resources, so our appetite is bigger than our budget, right? So again, the ability to say no and really ensure that what we're selecting is going to have a good impact. Teams working in silos to make decisions. So again, if engineering has some projects going on in the background that the marketing or customer-facing teams are not aware of, that's going to, at a minimum, drive inefficiency and misalignment, right? What the outcome of that will be, time will tell. But at a minimum, you're not going to have all the resources you think you have to allocate, and so you may be putting resources on programs here. You all look balanced, but the reality is there's some conflicting priorities because we have some skunk works projects that we need to address. Finally, a big one around unachievable project, right? So it's the quality or timing, scope, resources just not available to do that. A big part of this can be risk as well. Have we really been honest with ourselves on the front end about technology risk, execution risk, and how that's going to manifest itself here? It's really important to take risk off the critical path of the program, particularly if it's a technology risk, right? Make sure you're not driving innovation within the execution cycle of the project. You have that done offline, so that by the time you get to execution, those risks are mitigated and you're really focusing on delivering of the program. Okay. So to put some data behind that, right? Those are all good words based on experience that I've been fortunate to have in a number of organizations. But if we take a step back, KPMG, the project management organizations have done a series of surveys as well and looked across a number of different experiences and exercises, and really identified the top 5 drivers of project failure. Okay, and these aren't mutually exclusive, right? Everybody got a chance to pick their top 3, and these are what boil to the top, right? So a change in the organization's priorities, right? So coming all the way back to our strategic plan, right? Does our strategic plan transcend individuals in the organization setting priorities? Of course, your strategic plan can shift focus both opportunistically or in times of crisis. We can all relate to that over the last couple of years. Certainly, what's going on there that was unforeseen in your business, it may have had a small impact on your strategy, or it may have had a transformational impact. But certainly that happens, right? So just being clear about that, but really making sure that as much as possible, your strategic plan is well understood, and within what's in your control, you have a 3 to 5 year outlook against which you're setting your priorities. Change of project objectives, right? That gets a little more surgical in my view, right? So have we really understood the needs of the target segment, of the customers, and the available technologies on that front end? And when those objectives change, often they can be one of 2 things: something we didn't understand, or in response to misexecution on the program, right? We're running late already. We really need to draw a line in the sand on time. Therefore, we're going to shift this, right? We're going to shift our scope, or we're going to make sure we can handle at least these 2 accounts, and that takes a lot of different scope off the table and forces us to reassess what we're doing against cost and timeline. Inaccurate requirements gathering, again, can go hand in hand, forcing resets in the program. Inadequate vision, right? And to me, vision really just ties back into that understanding of the market and the customer, getting that risk off the table on that front end. And then within the project itself, poor communication, okay? So a big part of visual project management is around getting good alignment around the priorities and objectives within a program, and driving that communication around everything we need to do to execute that program. Getting requirements well outlined and making sure that we're tracking any of the data gaps that we currently have that we need to fill as part of executing that program. So preventing projects from being late. few key things to look at. And again, you're always going to have challenges, so not to sugarcoat it and pretend there's silver bullets, but in the spirit of driving improvement, in the spirit of getting better tomorrow than we are today, right? Even if we reduce the time that we're late by 50%, 75%, there's still going to be reality and challenges. But to the extent that you can affect what you can affect, right, and make some incremental improvements, that's really the drive that we go after. And so really looking at those big bars on the Pareto that are holding you back and making up a bulk of the delays is the emphasis here. And so in that spirit, driving that teamwork and collaboration around execution is a big part of it, right? We don't want people going off doing what they think is right or being concerned about an obstacle or a risk that they've encountered and being afraid to raise that up, and then having a whole set of tremors as a result of that delay affect downstream or lateral parts of that program that we didn't foresee, right? So really having that team view of what we need to do and having a culture where we're supporting each other, we're raising risks, and we're rallying around how to help break through challenges that were unforeseen or risks that we did foresee and we need to address is a huge part of that. So avoiding the fear of the red and really getting that on the table and rallying around that is key. Building the culture around that. Having a common goal for the team. So everybody working toward a milestone that requires that cross-functional engagement, right? A demo on this day, right? A first ship to this customer meeting this criteria, something that we're all working around, and so we all understand our relationship on the critical path. And then controlling the amount of work in the system. So making sure that we're not getting that scope creep, those other distractions, that we're really keeping our focus, our eye on the ball of what we said we're going to do, and keeping the resources focused as well. So much like in the lean environment and operations, we talk about the 3 M's of waste, okay? And these are Japanese terms, right? Muda, waste, right? So things we're doing that are not adding value to the process, okay? Mura, which is unevenness or irregular, right? So if we have one part of the program going really quickly, but then we have a critical path that is slowing that down, right? We need to have a balance in our resources and our project plan such that we're constantly aware of the critical path elements and doing everything we can to balance those elements against the rest of the execution of the program and making sure our resource allocation aligns to really compressing that critical path as much as possible. And then Murray, this forcibly or overburden, the idea that we may or may not have either sufficient talent or, as important, the right talent on the program to deliver against our plan. Okay, so having an honest look at, do we have a very experienced resource doing that, or is this the first time they're doing that on the project, right? And in either case, it's okay. We certainly want to take new associates and give them the experiences on there. But if we identify that as potential risk, who's the mentor, who's the backstop that's going to help and coach that individual so that they're confident in their ability to hit the plan, and we have transparency into challenges that are being faced. Okay, so kind of a good, just kind of template to look at against your project plans and say, where do we have things going on that aren't getting us there? Where do we have risk in balancing against critical paths? And where maybe do we have some of our resource risks that might become a challenge in the execution of that program? Now, again, visual project management gets more and more valuable the more cross-functional or the larger the project that you're doing, right? So if you're reorganizing your garage and you're going to do that in a day and a half, you're probably not going to spend a day and a half on the plan to do a day and a half project to save an hour. But as you get more complex in what you're doing and you get more cross-functional and interdependencies in nature, VPM can really be a good way to drive that communication and get alignment on what we're trying to do. And so here's a few good examples. Again, not just new product development, right? Or not just new plant launches or capital upgrades or consolidations, but also the wide range of areas, right? M&A integration is a big one, and I've done this personally with private equity groups where they're doing an actual integration and mapping out, from the pre-close activities through to the completed integration. What are all the steps that we need to do, and how are we tracking against that? Even on the front end, right? We're trying to grow and acquire at this rate. What's our funnel of opportunities for acquisitions look like? Where are they in that funnel, and how are we converging on closing prior to the integration? So using that, having that OBEA, that visual management approach to get everybody aligned around that and set the priorities right can be key. Marketing around lead qualification, conversion, right? Any of the e-commerce campaigns that you're doing, a lot of marketing is in very uncertain areas, right? We're trying to take a undefined segment and get visibility into where and how can we sell and break into that market and win. So you're constantly experimenting, right? And you're constantly trying to gather data and saying what's working, what isn't, what do we need to do different, getting good alignment around that, getting good metrics in place, and tracking that in a daily or weekly format is key, right? So a deep dive on a couple of examples there. Sales, right? Funnel management, so sales funnel size, conversion rate from leads to qualified leads, conversion rate from qualified leads to sales, and driving that all the way through. In finance, a lot of different areas. I've seen it directly in DSO and DPO, right? So we're trying to increase our DPO and decrease our DSO in the spirit of having positive cash flow. What are the key drivers of those gaps, and what are we doing daily, weekly, monthly to manage that at an execution level to optimize our cash flow? ERP projects, system consolidations, plant movement. We talked about R&D, and then IT as well as HR performance. A big part on HR. If you're filling roles or if you're in the process of executing on an organizational design plan, right? Where are we on that? What are the obstacles? What help do we need to address some of our performance gaps there? Training effectiveness can be a big one as well. So a lot of different ways to think about it, and it may change over time, right? Wherever your business is in your cycle, some of these elements are going to be more important, some are going to be less. So it's also not a permanent thing, right? Visual project management can be set up for weeks or a couple months or a year, depending on the scope of the project or what you're doing. In sales, it may be the standard work ad infinitum. You may always do it and evolve it with your business. So what does it really look like? What is visual project management, right? So it's really a tool that is in addition to the things that you have in place. This is not a substitute for MS Project. This is not a substitute for mapping out your critical path and understanding those interdependencies, right? That is all key. What this is a little more of in a project management terms, kind of that rolling wave view, right? It's really an at-a-glance view of the key project status, right? Real-time sense of the tracking, and really focused on issue management, right? Escalating the key issues, the key focus areas, and using that with data to drive our decision making. So we always want to have our headlights on about 4 weeks out and looking at what's going well against what we said we're going to do. What do the key milestones do? What help does the team need? What obstacles are they running into? So that we're consistently driving that forward in the context of the overall project plan and critical path. And so it's a daily management type approach where the key associates involved in executing that program are driving every day against that progress, escalating issues, and giving feedback on what's going well and what their challenges are. So that structured approach, it's a 5-day exercise with a project work stream. So once you get your project in place, or as you're starting to develop that overall project plan that you're going to then introduce VPM against, a 5-day approach to do that. And it's really this learn and do approach, right? The Kaizen approach to it. So driving that alignment and transparency on objectives, setting the key project targets, aligning on the structure, who's doing what, who's accountable at each phase, getting that master schedule really aligned and understanding how far out are we looking, days, weeks, months that we're managing within our visual project room, our OBEA, and what are the rules around our daily management and our project risk management so that we drive progress. So doing it right at the beginning of a project, coming in with a context around what are our key project targets and the key deliverables of our master schedule, and then building around that and setting the OBEA room against that is what's key. So this is what that flow looks like sequentially. Okay, so starting with this project team structure. So who's the manager, right? And that is that's the function of project manager, right? So everybody may or may not report to them, but they're the process owner for that project. They're the ones tracking progress of the program. They're the one raising the flag when we are going off track and when we need help. They're kind of the Switzerland, right? They should be really reporting data, driving progress, and escalating when we run into issues. Around that, we have a number of different functions, from development and marketing and sales, and then operations. And then on the outside, you might have a broader set of tools and roles that are engaging. So for your program, this is going to be defined on the front end around how we're structured and how the information feeds out and flows back in to that team. Definitely want to make it fun, right? So you hear a lot of good things about, naming the team, what are the big milestones, and laying out how are we going to celebrate, what are we going to do to really recognize the work that's going on throughout the project, and have some bets, have some fun elements there, right? And this becomes culture, maybe culture dependent a bit, right? Bringing in the nuances of your culture, but also a great opportunity to introduce new ideas and new approaches that you can really express and make it a great program to be part of. Setting the charter, right? So tying back, what are the key strategic objectives of the business? How does this program line into that? What are the measures of success for this program going to be? And having all the team members, yo one is something you hear sometimes, right? But really coming around that and saying, yep, I'm on board, I'm committed to helping us achieve these KPIs against those objectives. I understand what we're trying to do, I understand my role, and I'm going to help us get there, okay? And that front end often, this doesn't need to take months, but it also needs to happen, right? And it's really important in groundwork before you go in and start setting a schedule. And oftentimes we go the other way, right? You'll see organizations start with a schedule and list the KPIs and then say, okay, who are we going to assign to this, right? And by that point, we've not really gotten that engagement, and we've also missed a key opportunity for the folks that really can understand and impact that schedule to be part of that, okay? So you want to make sure you're looking at that flow, getting that team ownership and engagement well defined, so they're committed when you're putting this plan together. That's going to dramatically increase the likelihood of having a credible plan to begin with. And it's also going to foster that open communication to raise the risks and concerns so you can really work through that on the front end before you're starting to execute. The KPI dashboard should be a result of this step, right? So we should be looking at this and saying, what are the critical paths? What are the key deliverables? And what are the leading indicators, the lagging indicators? What's that blend here that's going to really tell us if this program is on track, right? So revenue, revenue is a lagging indicator, but forecasted revenue or first date of revenue or funnel value tied to our key accounts might be something you put in there, right? Are we on target for cost against our design challenges, right? So really mapping that out and saying, okay, if this is going well, that indicates this process is executing well. If we're rolling behind here, where do we need to look back on our schedule, and how does that roll into visual management to change the behaviors of the organization, of the team, to get this back on track? We want to have the clear contact list. And again, depending on the scope or the size of your project, this can be really important. If you have 3 people and they've worked together for 15 years, they probably got it. But if you're getting into a bigger team, you're getting into needing backups, right? Somebody's going on vacation, who can help out? Where are they located? Especially, now this is a very different conversation than maybe it was a couple years ago, with more and more people working remote, or at least working in parts of the country and not relocating to be part of a program. So really understanding where they're at, the time zone implications of that, and using that as a foundation when you go and you structure your engagement is important. Your key risk trackers, right? So back to this critical path, what have we identified through our dashboard? Who owns it? That are the things we need to make sure we clear or are going to become obstacles to hitting our challenge, okay? So you can see how these flow through sequentially. The key decision tracker, okay? So in the simplest form, this might be the milestones for your product development process, right? So at the end of phase 2, requirements are well defined. Our decision at that point is, are we going to sign off on that and begin quote unquote cutting metal, right? Are we going to begin really jumping in and doing the heavy design work, freezing those design requirements, understanding that if those requirements start to change, we're now generating some of this waste, some of that mood or that rework that we have to do. So really laying that out and saying everybody needs to understand, if marketing or the client, somebody comes in after this date with a change, it's going to be met with some challenges because there's going to be much bigger implications on the project than there are on the front end. The communication plan, right? So what are the daily, the weekly, the monthly, the quarterly elements to how we're going to communicate and how we're going to engage, right? So the daily stuff, the weekly stuff is going to be interactive. Weekly, there may be filling out a simple 4x4 one-pager, key accomplishments, key challenges, what's up for next week, what are the key risks that we're tracking, and our plan to clear it. Something to that effect so that we know what's going on. Maybe monthly, it's your management meeting or your ops review with a 20-minute update. Quarterly, a much bigger review, okay? So again, this is going to be business dependent based on the scope of your programs, the number of your programs, and maybe even where those programs are in their development stage. And then this RACI matrix. So RACI is just an acronym: responsible, accountable, contributor, and informed. You may have seen this, you may have seen variants about it, but it's really getting back to that project plan. Who is responsible for reporting on some of these, ultimately the key KPIs that we're tracking here, and who's responsible for escalating issues and driving them to closure, okay? So making sure we have that clear accountability throughout our development program. That doesn't mean they're solving the problem on their own, but that means they're the leader accountable for doing that. Then we have our 4-week daily management boards, breaking that down. And here you can start to see what this looks like in practice in an Obeya room, right? So everything from a detailed project plan, and a lot of times you can see this wrap around the room to what's going on and who owns what, right? Any rules of engagement, a calendar noting vacations and holidays and things of that nature built into it so that we're not surprised when somebody takes a week off. The standard work around reviews and calendarizing those. And then the process for assessing, what went well, what do we want to do different on future programs as a result of that. So these are a number of the key elements that we work with teams to develop over that 5-day workshop, and they can be implemented on subsequent programs. A master schedule, often like a swim lane, right? So what are the key milestones or deliverables, having that at a high end, and then say, okay, who needs to do what in order for that to be achieved? So starting in the end, we want to deliver the product to the customer. What are all the things that need to come in place to make that happen, and how do those branch out by department, right? So many of the programs I was involved in as an engineer, you'd actually get interviewed for your role. So you have this deliverable, you're in this function, what's your plan to do that? What are the different things you need to do, and who do you need help from in order to be able to pull that off? And the program manager would be interviewing and building this backwards, working with the team to get that in place. Doing that in a workshop environment can be very helpful to get that dialogue going cross-functionally and be done much more efficiently rather than through serial interviews, for example. So you could set up a legend, right, and really look at where are we today, right? So where's the line in the sand that we're at today? What are the key milestones in a particular swim lane? The decisions we need to make, any interdependencies, risk status, are we complete? And again, you can see this, you can see this example here. The idea is that it's a living document, it's got stickies, it's got this physical fingerprint factor that we talked about, so everybody can see it. If something moves, we come in, we meet this week, that moved out a week, okay, it moves out a week. Now we can see what that does to something else, we can make that change real time, and it's visible to everyone. The impact is there. It's not buried back in a spreadsheet somewhere where only a couple of people have visibility into that. Okay, so really making that physical and getting that in front of the team so we can hold each other accountable and get those shared learnings is critical. So these obey, as we call them, right? You've heard me use that term a little bit here over the course of the session. It's a Japanese word that means big room or war room. It refers to a form of project management. You know, anybody that's worked with me, you know, doing this in the sales construct, we'd call it a greenhouse. That came up about 10 or 12 years ago in some of my experience. And the idea there was we're fostering and cultivating growth as opposed to fighting over it, right? So again, use the term that makes sense and drives the right behavior or thought process in your organization. But the point is, it is a place where people can come with a project team converges to get work done, to talk through progress, where your visual management lies so that everybody can look at that, right? And in the remote world today, that Omeya room may be virtual, right? Mark Zuckerberg's has this vision of us being able to go to that Obeya virtually, right? And be able to look around a room and see everything in there as if we're physically there. But that is really the ultimate that you're trying to get to, is that fingerprint factor, and that if it's virtual, that engagement where we go to one place and we see that real time and can drive actions, right? So it's the safe place to talk about the key issues. We don't have a lot of burden around that. We try to avoid the PowerPoints, and really once we get it set up, just drive activity around it. It empowers the teams to drive plans, good clarity, good alignment, good visibility. In my last role running a business, we had Obeyas for sales and for new product development, right? In addition to the Gemba walks that operations went through every day, right? So you could go through any day and you would see the product development team in their Obeya room working on the key project of that day. Where are we ahead? Where are we behind? What help do we need? Right? It all happened in that one place. Everybody knew where to go and when to go to have those conversations. So we didn't have 5 different meetings a day on 5 different programs. It was one 45-minute meeting where we hashed everything out and we had all the information in front of us. Simple idea, we dedicate the time, we dedicate the space and the coordination of any of that problem solving work to help us break through that. Okay. So for strategy deployment, Obeya, this is an actual example of work we did with Berkshire Hathaway, the Pampered Chef business, which I know well because I have 2 daughters who like to cook a lot, right? But that business went through a lot of transformation work, particularly as part of Berkshire Hathaway, to figure out where and how to grow, right? What is our strategic plan? How are we targeting that growth? And what is our plan to roll that out? Building this Obeya around that to really facilitate and drive that alignment around building the plan, and then alignment around the key decisions that need to be made, the key milestones for executing that. Big help in getting consensus. In operations, again, often you might see that in a daily management construct, as shown over here, but you may also see that in tracking of key initiatives or key KPIs outside of daily management, where there's different projects and programs in place. So knowing where you can go to get that data and where to track. Over here, you see this tree. So you see the key problem-solving activity against key initiatives that are impacting performance of that operation. So all of that being in a co-located Gemba, and you can see here using a lot of the Japanese principles, right? The no chairs, right? We come in, we do it quick, we talk about the key issues, and then we move along about our day. A revenue growth obeya, right? So looking at targets in the lower part by region, right? What are we measuring? What are the key accounts that are going to contribute? What are the new product development initiatives that should be going into there? Are we on track? Are we missing? And what's the work that we need to do, right? Sales funnel, key marketing KPIs can all be built in. So it applies to all different parts of the business, operations, but heavily commercial, heavily product development, heavily marketing in terms of tracking and getting alignment and setting your plan. So sustaining that, right? We get that in place. How does this become the way we work, right? So keeping it simple and visual, keeping it so that we have to do those physical updates when we're there, really drives that engagement and is a big part in getting sustained, not just getting lost in the electrons of our spreadsheet worlds. Making them visual so everybody sees it, right? You can go in, there it is on the board. I'm concerned about this. Let's talk about it tomorrow. This one's important. Radical candor, don't hide the problems. And I'm gonna paint a little vision here for that. You know, whether it was my business, whether it's businesses that I work with today, a lot of times you'll see KPIs that are set, and teams will really endeavor to make those green, right? Really endeavor to report out. You see a lot of pride in teams when you go through, whether it's a tour of their Gemba, whether it's overview of the project, and everything's green. Aren't we doing a great job? And you know, there's certainly a lot to be celebrated when that happens. And so we want to not cut that short. We want to take the time to recognize the great work that's going on and all the effort that people are doing and the results that are coming out. But we're in the context of a project review or daily management, right? What we're really in those cases is we're in a problem-solving context. And if everything we see is green, that's probably not what we're working on all day and probably not what we're talking about, right? And so I always ask that question to folks, how much of your day is spent on things going well, right? And so if you put a lot of work into a project plan, it's showing that everything's green, but none of that is what you're spending your time on, then I can't see what you're spending your time on through the metrics, through the KPIs, and therefore I can't help, right? And so really getting to that point of having your metrics, having your visual management correlate to where and how you and your team are spending time, leveraging that concept kind of takes the sting out of showing things red and puts it in the mindset of this is what we need to be talking about. We need to talk about what's not going well because we need to help each other try to get that back on track. Getting that ownership in there around those, right? So I own this and I'm not afraid to show that we're behind, and I'm going to work with the team and figure out what we can do to get it back on track. It's really telling the story using the facts and data. So we have our overall plan. We have our strategic objective. We can show how this aligns to that. We can show where we're off track and what we need to do different. Standardizing and scheduling to simplify the process, right? So making sure that we have a common way to look at that, a common way to communicate it. The more we can make that common and standard, particularly if you're in a role where you're looking across businesses, if you can get your teams to talk the same way against the same formats, you spend a lot less time figuring out what you're looking at and a lot more time coaching through solving the problems and addressing the gaps and seeing the interrelationships and where one part of the business may be able to help another. So we talk a lot about standardization, and we talk about it in all the different functions, not because we think everything should be standardized for the sake of standardizing, but quite simply because it eliminates the time wasted trying to figure out what you're looking at and allows you and the rest of your team to very quickly hone in on the key things we need to be talking about. And the obeya needs to do that well so that you can use that time wisely and not be distracting the team with reporting. We avoid open-ended conversations, right? So keep it focused, having those right KPIs. We don't want, exception-based reporting. We want it honed in. This is the target. This is what we said. Let's go with that. And again, celebrate those wins, right? Make it fun. So when we do achieve a big milestone, when we do have a lot of green up there, make sure there's a way, make sure there's a path, make sure there's a culture that is driving that celebration. But don't confuse that with the radical candor and keeping your eye on the problems, right? You want to celebrate surfacing problems and using problem solving to address those as much as you celebrate the firefighting and the heroes in the business, right? You need to celebrate methodical use of tools more so than firefighting if you're going to make that shift. So some key ways of working in a good visual project management culture, right? So conduct lively meetings that are testing people's understanding, so you're challenging. Obviously, you're doing that in a respectful way. You're doing that in a curious and inquisitive way. The information that you're using for the basis of these meetings is fact-based, not I think, not in my experience, but now this is what's going on versus what we said. Here's the gap, and this is the challenge we're facing. Here's what we're thinking about doing, and challenge that way, right? We don't need to go over the 4 screens of everything green to get to the reds, right? We need a way and method to celebrate what's going well, but in the obey and these focus areas, what are the risks and problems, and what are we doing collaboratively to work through those, and celebrate that. Celebrate conquering those challenges, not just going through a bunch of green that folks really aren't paying attention to or really aren't critical to the nature of the target or the goal. Celebrate when problems are raised, right? Thank you for bringing that up. You're right. That's a key risk. Not sure how we missed it. We'll talk about that when we look back on the program. But now that we understand that, let's talk about what we can do there and what the implications might be. Thank you for bringing that up. Right? Really celebrate the awareness of that and drive leadership alignment around what we're going to do about it. Right? Try to avoid, again, these open-ended, right? Make it task focused. What are we doing? Who's got it? When's it going to be done by? What help do you need? Right? Every one of these discussions should be ended with what help do you need, from daily management to problem solving to obeya rooms. What help do you need is what ends up in support of these key issues. Lead by example, right? So leaders are trainers, right? We're doing this work to deploy this. We're present in reviews, and we're coaching and helping in the context of these obeya rooms. High collaboration, radical transparency, right? So this is all about the teamwork in that room, right? This is all about focus on the objectives. Everybody brings value to that group, otherwise they wouldn't be there, right? So we talk about knowledge power versus position power. You have a role, you have a deliverable, focus on that, right? All equality, but a real heavy focus on that transparency and collaboration to help each other out. The team wins, the team's successful, or the team is behind together. It's not an individual in any of those. Honoring your commitments, right? Taking responsibility for following through, right? A good way we did this in our business, we had a milestone due today. Okay, is it done? No. Here's why. Okay, when's it going to be done? Tomorrow. Fair enough? Red dot 1, right? Go another day, still not done, red dot 2. Get your third red dot, and that's where we take an offline conversation and really look at, okay, what's the issue? What help do you need? The importance of a VPM culture in that context is that if we talk about things every day, when we get to day 3 and we're still behind, it's a concern, but we still stay in that problem-solving mindset, right? We're still in a very constructive mindset. We're still in a coaching mindset where we're helping the team and trying to use data to break through it. If we only talk once a week, and then we go 3 weeks and suddenly we realize we're not getting through it, now we as leaders and the team are a little more under the gun, and the stress levels start to go up. And it becomes there's higher implications on other parts of the program, and the challenges start to become greater. If we're only touching base once a month and we thought something was supposed to be done now and it's not started and we slipped a whole month for a month, now escalations start to happen, people start to retreat, and we have to start redoing entire project plans. You start to generate a whole lot of waste in the process. So this VPM culture is all about reporting on a real quick cadence, doing it with short visibility and responding quickly so that the issues never spin out of control and we don't get to the point where people start to sweep under the rug because the consequences are so dire, right? It's a lot easier to honor commitments when we're talking about it daily and we're helping each other out than when we go a lot further along. Again, celebrate the wins, learn from the losses. Okay. So a good plan implemented today is better than a perfect plan implemented tomorrow, right? We need to start something, right? You'll often hear too, the only thing that's certain about a plan is it's going to change, but we need to start somewhere, right? Every football team goes out with a plan at the beginning of the game, and by halftime, they're making a whole series of adjustments, but they're doing it based on what they learned and how that executed. You need to make sure that plan is a living document, and using a visual project management approach is a great way to do it.